Today is a day when reporting restriction orders ought not to apply, save in one respect, which is unlikely to arise. Therefore, normal rules apply. Those who have mobile electronic devices may use them to transmit silently to the outside world what you have seen and heard in the hearing, but only after 10 minutes have elapsed since the event you're describing. 10 minutes must elapse so that you don't preempt the video stream, which is going to be subject to a 10-minute delay. You may not use any recording device for recording proceedings or for taking photographs. You can now proceed.
Thank you, sir.
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Yes.
HN 122, good morning. I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry this morning. Now, you're the former Special Demonstration Squad undercover police officer known to this inquiry by the cipher HN 122, is that right?
That's correct.
You'll be referred to as HN 122 throughout questioning today, as there's a restriction order in place that prohibits publication of your real name. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do.
You've prepared a witness statement for the purpose of this inquiry, is that right?
That's correct.
I think it's 88 pages long, is that correct?
I believe so.
And dated the 19th of May of 2021, is that right?
I believe so.
You've signed it.
I have.
Are the contents of your witness statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
That puts the whole of your witness statement into evidence, and if not already, it should appear on the inquiry's website in due course. Now, I just want to begin a little with your early career, please, HN 122, and I think it's right that you joined the Metropolitan Police Service in the early 1980s, is that correct?
That's correct.
And by the time you transferred to Special Branch, you'd reached the rank of Detective Constable, is that right?
Yes.
You worked on a C-Squad desk that you describe in your witness statement as monitoring attempts by extreme left-wing groups to take over local community groups. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. Well, that's a topic we'll revisit a little later. But it's right that that desk eventually closed. Is that correct?
That's right.
And following the closure of that desk, you transferred to E-Squad. Is that right?
Yes.
Before you joined the Special Demonstration Squad, the SDS, were you aware of any separate Special Branch undercover unit that was obtaining and providing intelligence back to Special Branch?
Not specifically, but I did come to learn of it, yes.
Can you remember how you came to learn of that unit?
I believe it was in conversation with the supervisors.
Did you know before you were recruited into the Special Demonstration Squad that the unit was known as the SDS or any similar name?
I don't recall what I knew it as.
How much did you know about the unit before your recruitment into it?
Only that it existed, but nothing about the details of what it did.
Were you aware before you were recruited into the SDS whether in your other roles you were receiving intelligence that had come from that unit?
I believe there was information I believe came from such a unit, yes.
Did you find that information in your other roles of any value?
Yes, very much so.
Now, being careful with names, please, HN 122, can you remember how you came to be recruited by the SDS?
I was approached by one of the managers on the unit.
Are you able, and use the cipher list, please, if you need to, be careful about names, please. Are you able to tell us who that manager was?
The cipher is HN 109.
All right. Well, stick with the cipher, please, in the case of HN 109. Very approximately, can you remember when this occurred, when the approach was made?
I believe it was sometime in 88.
All right. And was it something that you were interested in?
It's not something I'd considered previously, no.
Following the approach, was there anything that you did in order to assist your decision as to whether this was something you might want to pursue or not?
Well, I spoke to my colleagues who would know what the unit was about, and I spoke to my family.
And did there come a time when you spoke to senior colleagues about the role?
I'm sorry, do you mean in terms of an interview?
Yes.
Yes.
Again, being careful about names if you need to be. Can you remember which colleagues you spoke to you or interviewed you?
That would have been DCI Gray.
And was HM 109 involved?
As best of my recollection, yes.
Was anybody other than the three of you involved in that interview?
I don't believe so.
Please don't be specific, but can you remember where that interview took place, whether it was on Metropolitan Police premises or private premises or anywhere else?
That would have been on police premises.
Now, in your witness statement, you explain that you're also seen at home with your wife at some stage, in addition to what you described as the more formal interview at the office. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
So does it follow that there was an interview with HM 109 and Detective Chief Inspector Martin Gray, followed by a home visit? Is that the way it worked?
Yes.
Just going to ask that a document be pulled up, please, which is MPS 0738101, which is B46, tab B46. Thank you. This is a manuscript note of an interview that was conducted with you, not in relation to your SDS recruitment, but with Operation Herne police officers, so the police officers that were investigating the SDS sometime later. Do you follow?
Yes.
And if we look at the page that's up on the screen, about 5 lines down, what's been recorded there is initial approach, informal interview, DCI Martin Gray. Do you see that?
Yes.
Thank you. Can you remember what the character of your interview with Martin Gray or and HM 109 was like? Was it formal, or as you described it in your witness statement, or in fairness to you, more formal? Or was it an informal process?
It wasn't particularly structured. It was more of a conversation as to how I felt about it and what would be involved.
Is that the reason why you described it as an informal process when you were interviewed by Herne officers in 2013?
Yes.
Presumably at that interview you were told that you were being considered as a prospective candidate for the SDS.
Mm-hmm.
I've been careful about any operational sensitivities. Can you recollect the general themes that were discussed during that interview with HM 109 and DCI Martin Gray?
No, other than mention of the group that they intended I should go to.
Right. Just want to focus on that initial interview or initial conversation and just ask you about some topics and ask you as to whether you have any recollection as to whether they were discussed with you or not, all right? Mm-hmm. Did they discuss with you anything about potential training for the role?
Not that I recall.
Did they say anything about the length of the deployment or the likely length of the deployment?
In general, and certainly not specific terms, 4 to 5 years.
Yes or no answer to this question, please. Did they say anything about the type or nature of the groups that you might be tasked to infiltrate?
Very broadly, yes.
Did they say anything at that stage about the need to create a cover identity?
Possibly, I don't recall.
Did they say anything at that stage about cover living arrangements having to be organised?
I don't recall.
Was anything said at that stage about the impact that an infiltration you might engage in might have on the lives of members of the public?
Not that I recall.
Anything said at that stage about the risk of relationships whilst deployed?
Not at that stage.
Was anything said at that stage about the impact the deployment might have on you and your family?
Yes, I believe there was.
All right. Can you remember what you were told about that at that initial interview?
Only that the role would sometimes require very long hours and periods away from home.
Was anything said at that initial interview about measures in place to ensure your welfare? Anything said about that?
No.
Now, for your reference, if you need it, I just want to ask you about something you said in your witness statement at page 3, which is at paragraph 11, where you said that it was an honour to be thought capable of gathering intelligence because this was the pinnacle of Metropolitan Police Special Branch work. Do you remember saying that in your witness statement?
Yes.
Did the STS consider itself to be an elite unit?
Not a phrase I would have used, no.
All right. What phrase would you use?
Well, it was the Special Branch existed to gather intelligence, and this unit was gathering the best possible intelligence, and we certainly would have been aware of that.
Did you ever get the impression that the unit considered that the importance of its work meant that the rules of ordinary policing could be stretched if required?
Not in those terms, no.
In what terms was your understanding?
It was inevitable that for things like fly posting, which was a basic requirement of most political activists, that is technically illegal, but it was regarded as a minor breach of the law that we would be permitted to do.
Right. We'll explore things like that in a little more detail a little later, all right? We know, for example, that a number of STS undercover officers engage in sexual activity with others in the groups that they were infiltrating. Was there any sense that going as far as this was permissible if it meant that the object of intelligence gathering was met? Did you get any sense of anything like that?
No.
Again, that's a topic we'll explore in a little more detail a little later. Are you able to tell us what you meant when you made reference to intelligence gathering being the pinnacle of special branch work?
Well, as I said, that was the reason for Special Branch to exist, was gathering such intelligence by various means, but the intelligence that SDS could gather was being done by police officers and therefore ultimately as reliable as it could possibly be.
I see. So the reliability of the source, do I understand you correctly?
Yes.
All right. Now, you also say in your witness statement that you never aspired to undercover work, particularly because you weren't confident that it was something that you were able to do. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
What changed your mind?
I think in those initial conversations I was reassured that if at any time I didn't feel confident, I would be able to withdraw.
Were you still lacking in confidence about your ability to carry out such work by the time that you transferred into the unit?
I still had my doubts, but as I say, I was reassured that it's something that I could walk away from if I needed to.
Can you remember what those doubts or anxieties were?
Not specifically, no.
Did anything occur or did you do anything that helped fortify you for the role in terms of your confidence?
No, I simply undertook the initial work in the back office, spoke to the other officers who were deployed, and just carried on progressing through the stages, and gradually the confidence built.
Can you remember whether any effort was made by those involved in your recruitment to ascertain your suitability for an undercover deployment?
I don't know what they did, other than I assume they spoke to other officers who'd worked with me.
Can you remember if any effort was made by them to ascertain your resilience?
I wouldn't know.
I think it's right that you were married at the time that you were approached to join the SDS. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you've already told us that following on from the interview or conversation that you had with HN 109 and Martin Gray, that the next thing that happened in terms of your recruitment was a home visit to you and your wife. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
What was the purpose of the visit to your home? Can you remember?
My understanding was that they wanted to ensure that officers had a stable family background and that wives in particular were aware of what would be required.
Right, well, we'll develop that a little more in a moment. Can you remember whether you and your wife were spoken to separately or together or a combination of the two?
As far as I recall, it was together.
Did you understand that your relationship was of interest to those who were involved in your recruitment?
In terms of its stability, yes.
I see. Was that an impression that you formed, or was that something that was said to you in terms that what your superiors were interested in was assessing the stability of your marriage?
I think it may well have been something that they mentioned as a reason for the visit.
Now, you've told us a little moment ago, and I think you say in your witness statement as well, was that the reason for the visit was to assess your stability as a couple and how that would withstand the strain of a deployment. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you remember how the stability of your relationship was tested?
Don't believe it was tested.
All right. Can you remember the sorts of questions that were asked of you and your wife?
Very general in terms of how long we'd been together and so on.
Right. So length of relationship?
I really can't recall specific questions, I'm afraid.
All right. What about the strains? Was anything said about what the likely strains might be?
In terms of long hours periods away from home,
So long hours and long periods away from home. You said in your witness statement that you understood that DIHN 109 wanted to ensure that your wife was aware and that any miscommunication between you and your wife was avoided. Do you remember saying that?
not offhand, no.
All right. I think it's at page 4, paragraph 13. You start at the towards the bottom of page 4. It says apparently one wife found out her husband's retirement due that he was a superintendent. He'd told her he'd worked for Shell. Whilst it had changed by the time that you joined, and we were encouraged to be more open with our partners, I understood that DIHN 109 wanted to ensure that my wife was aware and that any miscommunication was avoided. Did you see that?
Yes.
All right. What did you think HN 109 wanted to make your wife aware of?
Simply the nature of the work that I was going to be undertaking.
And by nature, what do you mean?
The hours and the periods away from home.
What did you understand was meant by the term miscommunication?
I'm not sure. I don't recall using the word miscommunication in reference to that superintendent. That wasn't specifically SDS. That was a special branch officer.
No recollection of that particular term?
I'm afraid not. No.
Was anything said at this meeting about the risk of developing a sexual relationship whilst deployed?
No.
Was anything said to you about the significance of a family life for an SDS undercover officer?
Only in terms that the deployment would be or could be very stressful, and it was important to have a stable family life to support that.
So do I understand you correctly that it was considered that having a family life gave you a bit of a support network that would help you cope with the demands of the deployment?
That was my understanding, yes.
Can we look, please, at a document, MPS 0527467, which is at tab B3 of the hard copy bundle. And this is a document, a special branch memo. Just wait for it to catch up on the screen. Page 2 of this document, please. It's a special branch memo dated the 24th of January 1989, where details in relation to your family and your wife's family are rehearsed. And at paragraph 3, it's recorded that you provided such details. Can you remember whether it was at that home interview that you provided details in relation to your family life, or on another occasion, or was it on multiple occasions?
I assume it would be between the interview and the home visit.
And are you aware as to whether Special Branch undertook any inquiries of their own into your family?
I have no idea.
at paragraph 3 of that document, there's a comment that none of your family had previously come to the notice of special branch. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does it follow from that that there may have been some sort of independent inquiry into your family before your recruitment into the SDS?
I can only speculate, but I would assume that they checked special branch records to see if there was any member of my family who was politically active.
I see. Now, you make reference in your witness statement to having been through a positive vetting process in advance of your recruitment. Obviously, taking care to avoid any operational sensitivities or anything like that. Are you able to tell us what a positive vetting process involved?
It was an enhanced vetting procedure for officers handling secret material and standard for all SB officers.
I see. So that's something, a procedure you'd have been through regardless of whether you're going into the SDS or not?
Yes.
I see. Do you know if there was any consideration given by your superiors of your own political views before you transferred to the SDS?
Not that I'm aware of.
You described the interview with HM 109 and DCI Martin Gray as a conversation or informal interview. Was there ever a point where you had a more formal style of interview or more formal assessment in advance of being offered your position in the SDS?
No, I don't think so.
Were you ever given any feedback of as to why you were successful in your application to join the SDS?
Not that I recall, no.
Were you ever given any feedback as to what qualities it was considered you had that made you appropriate for the role?
No.
I just want to look at a document with you. This isn't in the hard copy bundle, but it's MPS 0728960, which is, so that's in your loose leaf bundle, which is a copy of the SDS annual report for 1989, dated around May 1989. So this is the annual report HM 122 for the period just before your deployment commenced, all right? And just want to look at paragraphs, forgive me, pages 8 and 9 on the documents. It should start with paragraph 6, thank you. And this says the following: throughout the past 20 years, there's been a continual review of the functions and operations of SDS. During the past year, Commander Operations directed the Detective Chief Inspector to conduct a further review of SDS with particular reference to recruitment, operational deployment and supervisory aspects. The selection procedure for field officers has not previously presented any problems in finding suitable special branch officers to fill the vacancies when they occur. However, the stressful and difficult nature of SDS field work made it necessary for the selection criteria to be re-examined to ensure that potential recruits are equipped psychologically and emotionally to cope with the pressures of this posting. Each SDS candidate is told that he will be retained on field duties subject to the following conditions. He is physically and mentally capable of performing the assigned duty. He is working to the high standard required of SDS officers, and that the political area in which he is deployed warrants continued coverage. Did you consider your experience of being recruited into the SDS as being part of a selection procedure?
Yes.
Do you feel that the way in which you were recruited sufficiently tested whether you were, to borrow the terms in the report, psychologically and emotionally suited to an undercover deployment?
I assume so.
you say you assume so. Do you feel that your superiors did enough to test that you were sufficiently robust to undertake a deployment?
Well, I'm afraid I really don't know how they structured the interview, what they were specifically asking. So from my point of view, it seemed quite informal.
Were the three conditions that are mentioned in that document, so physical and mental capability, high standards, and the availability of a political area warranting coverage, were they ever explained to you during your recruitment?
I think in general terms, yes, as the conditions of the employment. In specific terms, obviously, I can't recall now.
When it came to areas warranting coverage, once you deployed, did you keep under review whether the groups that you had infiltrated merited continued infiltration? Was that something you kept an eye on?
That wasn't my role.
Why did you not consider it your responsibility to keep under review the justification of any deployment that you were engaged in?
I was satisfied from the information I had that the groups would fulfil a requirement of special branch, but I didn't have any other wider information to make that sort of strategic assessment.
Well, we'll look at what was being said about some of the groups a little later on, all right? Now, once you joined the STS, did you have any formal training that was specific to the role or specific to undercover work?
There were no training courses, but there was quite intensive discussion during the time that I was in the back office and before deployed.
So is that discussion with undercover officers who were already in the field?
Yes, and managers.
And managers, all right. We'll get to that, those discussions in due course. In preparing to deploy, did you ever associate with any left-wing groups or activists or anarchist groups in advance of deploying?
On initial deployment into the field, then, yes, I believe I went to one or two left-wing meetings.
Right. Before you went into the field, was there any sort of engagement of that nature?
No, I don't believe so. No.
Now, you say in your witness statement, this is at paragraph 17 on page 6, you say that your preparation could involve drawing on experiences of undercover officers that were already deployed, and that's something I think you've just mentioned in your evidence. Can you recollect, being careful about names, can you recollect any specific colleague whose experiences you drew on in preparation to deploy? And write it down if you need to, HN 122.
I would say I probably spoke to all the officers who were deployed at one time or another, both in groups and potentially individually.
And we'll come on to this topic in a little more detail later, but were you aware whether any of them had engaged in relationships in the course of their deployment?
No, not at all.
Was there any sort of written resource available that undercover officers could consult?
No.
Have you heard the expression tradecraft manual, which has been used to describe documentary material that was compiled and retained by the SDS, intended to provide guidance to undercover officers? Have you heard that expression?
I've been shown documents referencing it, yes.
Were you aware of any such manual?
No, it didn't exist whilst I was there.
Were you aware of any sort of collection of documents that could be used as a resource to assist you in terms of guidance once you were in the field?
No.
You say in your witness statement that the expression tradecraft was not generally used. Is that right?
That's right.
There is evidence, HM 122, available to the inquiry that a tradecraft manual was put together and made available to undercover officers. Are you sure that at the very least certain tactics were not referred to as tradecraft? Are you sure about that?
I didn't recall it until I was asked about it.
Can I take you next to MPS 0730589, which is at tab B33 in the hard copy bundle. So 0730589. And just to assist you, HM122, this is a code of conduct for undercover officers that came about around June 1993. And you address this at page 7 of your statement at paragraph 22. Was that code of conduct document something that you were aware of whilst you were deployed?
No.
Did you become aware of it at some stage?
It may have been one of the documents I've been shown, but not at the time.
I think you say in your witness statement that you only became aware of it after your deployment had finished.
Right, yes.
Does it follow from that you became aware of it sometime after the conclusion of your deployment in 1993?
Yes, but I've no idea when.
All right. So does it follow that you weren't aware of this code of conduct whilst you were in the field?
That's correct.
All right. Had you had, in preparation of your evidence, have you had an opportunity to have a look at this document?
Not in detail, no.
Not in detail, all right. Let me see if I can assist you, because at paragraph 88 of your witness statement, so page 7 of your witness statement, paragraph 88, you say that your recollection was that this document was developed at least in part because of the deployment of non-SDS undercover officers in the field of football-related violence. Do you remember making that observation in your witness statement?
I don't recall saying that. I think there must have been some sort of context to that conversation at the time.
If I was to ask you then whether this document was or wasn't SDS specific, could you help me with that?
From what you're saying, it doesn't sound like it was an SDS document.
I'm drawing that from your evidence and your witness statement.
I don't recall at what time or in what context we had that conversation.
Yes, paragraph, I think it should have been paragraph 22, forgive me. Thanks. So page 7, paragraph 22. Again, if I was to ask you then what it was about football violence that gave rise to the creation of this code, would you be able to assist?
I'm aware that there was an officer in Special Branch who had been involved in such operations previously.
Were you provided any guidance with how far you could involve yourself in the private lives of others in advance of your deployment?
Not in such terms, no.
What do you mean, not in such sense?
But there's no specific conversation saying this is how far you can involve yourself in their private lives.
Were you given any guidance or advice regarding where to draw the line in relation to relationships that you developed with members of your target groups?
No specific instruction, no.
How far did you consider it was permissible to involve yourself with members of your target groups?
It was a necessary part of the job to become on friendly terms with these people, but there was no instruction or intention to form any sort of intimate relationship.
Did you consider that it was permissible to enter people's homes, for example,
That would be a part of it,
meeting their families,
if invited to do so.
attending social events outside of the group's activities?
Potentially.
And I think you tell us in your witness statement that by the time you were deployed into an anarchist group known as Class War, you would visit somebody called Tim Scargill, who was a prominent member of Class War, and another member at their home, and you might stay over sometimes. Is that right? Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
How did you come to judge what was and what wasn't appropriate conduct in relation to others?
It seemed to me at the time that that was a perfectly normal thing for me to do as an associate of theirs.
You say in your witness statement that you didn't share the political views of those in your target groups. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Did your political differences ever influence what you did within those groups?
No.
Did your political differences influence the nature of your reporting?
No, I don't think so.
Did you take any steps to ensure that your differences with those or against those that you're reporting on didn't influence what you were doing? Did you take any steps to make sure that your differences didn't impact you in any way?
As a special branch officer, my role was to report impartially and fairly on whatever area of SB work I was involved with. There was nothing particular about reporting on these individuals.
I think you told us there would have been occasions where you would socialise within your target groups. Is that right?
To an extent, yes.
Yes. Can you remember what sort of social activity you might involve yourself in?
With some of them, it might be going to the pub.
Going to the pub.
With others, it might involve going to their house.
And does it follow that you may have been around alcohol consumption?
At times, yes.
Would you have drunk whilst socialising with those in your groups?
To an extent.
Were you ever concerned about the effect of alcohol and maybe your inhibitions being reduced and any risks that might flow from that?
Absolutely.
What measures did you take in relation to that?
Simply to limit the amount of alcohol.
Were you ever around drug use?
No.
Can we look at one of your an intelligence report that's attributed to you, please, HM122? This is UCPI 30099, which is at tab 61 of the hard copy bundle. UCPI 30099. Now, this is an intelligence report dated the 1st of July 1991, and it relates to an individual supporter of the Revolutionary Communist Party, which is the group you initially deployed into. Is that right?
That's right.
And we can see about Centre, although it's under a privacy redaction, we can see that the document names this individual's fiancée, and the main body of the document says this: Privacy is a fully committed supporter of the RCP. He was once a full member, but for an unknown reason reverted to being a supporter in 1986. He's highly regarded in party circles, mostly because of the length of time that he's been around, since 1982. He's recently become engaged to Anne, and then there's a privacy redaction, and plans to marry in 1991. I think it's right. You tell us in your witness statement that you were invited to this individual's wedding. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you attend?
Yes.
Why did you attend?
She had requested that I attend. I was under the impression that she was quite intimidated by the other members of the RCP, who would be the only other persons present, and she wanted me to be there as reassurance, as she regarded me as not as fanatical as the others.
But by she, are you referring to the fiancée?
Yes.
Did you consider that there may be intelligence opportunities at this event?
I don't believe there were any specific intelligence opportunities. I knew all the people who were going anyway.
Was there any reason why you couldn't just make your excuses and avoid attending this event?
I could have thought of an excuse, but it would have looked odd. I decided not to.
Why do you say it would have looked odd?
Because of my relationship with him, then for me to refuse to go would have been a snub to that friendship.
Just want to explore that. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily have required a refusal to go. You could have said you had another important commitment or something like that. Did that ever cross your mind?
Yes, I can. At every incident or occasion like this, then I would always consider the opportunities or the disadvantages of each course of action.
See, the reason I'm asking you in particular about this is because a marriage or a union, that's a pretty personal occasion in somebody's life, isn't it?
Yes.
Did you not think that it was overly intrusive to attend this particular event?
Not at the time, no.
And why do you say that?
Well, that was obviously the conclusion I came to, but the full reasoning I couldn't possibly recall now.
Looking back, do you think it may have been more appropriate to have tried to make up a sympathetic excuse and avoided this event?
Possibly.
Did you receive any training or guidance as to the appropriateness of sexual relationships with individuals whilst undercover?
There was no formal training or guidance on it that I was aware of. It was a subject of discussion with another officer, and quite apart from the fact that it would be morally wrong, but that was in context of, as with anybody who's working away from home for long periods of time, there is the opportunity to have such relationships. It was not in connection with the thought that this was a legitimate means of infiltration to a group.
Did your managers ever discuss with you the potential for a sexual encounter or relationship?
I don't recall it.
You don't recall. So does it follow from that you don't recall any managerial guidance as to how to handle such a situation if it came up?
There was discussion, whether it was with management, I can't recall, but the difficulty of handling such an approach if it was made by somebody else, yes.
All right. Can you remember then what was discussed about these sorts of difficulties?
No, it was various people would have various options, whether it was to say I'm not attracted to you or I'm already engaged or whatever. There were possibilities, but they would be, if it happened, you would have to tailor your response to what was appropriate to your circumstances then.
Did anyone ever raise the possibility that one of the options might have been to engage with any individual making an advance or an approach?
No.
Now, you said in your witness statement that it would be completely naive to think that undercover officers during your time never realised that it might be possible to have sexual relationships in their undercover identities. I think that's a paragraph 25, page 8. What led you to come to that conclusion?
Sorry, the conclusion of...
That it would be completely naive to think that undercover officers during your time never realised that it might be possible to have sexual relationships in their undercover identities?
As I say, as in any line of work, whether it was a travelling salesman or whatever, people who are away from home for long periods might find themselves engaging in such behaviour. So it'd be naive to think that it wouldn't cross the mind if that officer was so inclined.
Are you saying, and don't let me put words into your mouth, this may be a rather crude way of expressing it, but are you saying that it was an obvious risk in your line of work?
Yes.
Yes. And given that that possibility was obvious to you and obviously to your colleagues, because you've told us there was some discussion about it, does it follow that it must have been obvious to your managers as well?
I assume so.
During your time on the STS, had you ever heard about any of your colleagues engaging in sexual conduct with others whilst deployed? This is whilst you're on the STS.
No.
Something else you said in your witness statement was that you believe that there was a deliberate policy. This is paragraph 26, so pages 8 over the page to page 9. You believe that there was a deliberate policy of selecting undercover officers who were in stable relationships because the management perceived that there was a far lower risk of officers succumbing to temptation, as well as from a more general welfare perspective.
Yes.
What made you believe that there was a deliberate policy in place?
I don't think there was a specific thing that made me think that. That was my impression.
That was your impression. And what gave you that impression?
I couldn't say.
Does it follow from what you said in your witness statement that, in your view, that policy, as you termed it, had two purposes? So reducing the risk of temptation and facilitating general welfare. Were those the purposes of selecting officers who were in stable relationships, as far as you're concerned?
That's how it appeared to me.
Right. And forgive me if I'm asking the obvious, but what was the temptation that you were speaking about?
Well, as I've said, where people are working away from home and family for extended periods.
And what did you understand the role of an STS undercover officer's partner to be in terms of the officer's welfare?
Support at times of stress.
Did you consider that an undercover officer's welfare was also the responsibility of the SDS, of the unit?
Yes.
Did you consider that it was also the responsibility of your managers?
Yes.
We'll come on to the subject of welfare in due course. But given the implementation of this policy and given the obvious risk that you've described, does it not follow that the managers responsible in your time must have at least been aware of a risk of sexual relationships occurring whilst officers were deployed?
I assume so. Yes.
Was it ever conveyed to you by managers that they had an awareness that sexual relationships had been a problem within the unit?
No.
Did you ever gain any understanding whilst you were in the unit?
No.
Was it ever explained to you in terms that married officers were preferred because of a risk of sexual activity or an awareness of sexual activity amongst others whilst deployed?
No.
Did you engage in sexual or intimate activity with anybody else whilst deployed?
No.
Do you consider that there was any conceivable justification for entering into a sexual relationship whilst deployed?
None that I'm aware of, no.
What would be the problem with entering into such a relationship?
primarily from my point of view, the problem would be the increase in stress, having to have yet more cover stories and the risk of exposure.
What about the fact that the other person in that relationship, the other half of it, would have been deceived? Was that something that you ever applied your mind to?
Yes, it's morally wrong.
Being careful as to names, please. At the time of your deployment, so far as you're aware, what was the attitude of your undercover colleagues to the possibility of engaging in a sexual encounter or relationship? What impression did you get as to their attitudes?
I don't recall any conversation about engaging in such activity at all.
No, but the possibility of it. What were their attitudes to the possibility of that occurring?
I don't recall any comment about possibilities.
Does the same apply to your managers if I was to ask you about them?
Again, I don't recall any such conversation.
But the topic was spoken about, I think you told us. Is that right?
I spoke with one other officer about it.
Well, let's just have a look at that. And this is MPS 0738101. So it's a document we've already seen, which is the note of the interview with Operation Herne police officers that you had on the 8th of November 2013, all right? If we look at the bottom of page 2, what's recorded there, and going across to page 3, not aware, so this is a record of something you said to Herne officers, all right? Not aware of any sexual relationships, opportunity to discuss with another UCO, no talks from SMT, I presume that means senior management team, in respect of sexual relationship. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, being careful not to mention the name or gender or field of deployment of the officer that you spoke to, can you recollect what the nature of the conversation was, the nature of the discussion you had with that officer?
Very much as I've said before, in terms of there was an obvious opportunity for people, if so inclined, to indulge in such things. But not only did we both find it morally wrong, but it would be impossible to maintain in that particular field.
Can you write down for us, please, the cipher of the officer that you had that conversation, please? And once that's done, if it could perhaps be shown to the chairman. Thank you. I won't take that any further, and we'll retain this note for the record.
Certainly, and I think that is something that will have to remain closed.
Yes. Was there any gossip whilst you were on the STS about past or current undercover officers perhaps being involved in sexual activity whilst deployed?
No.
Your service as an STS undercover officer followed on from that of Bob Lambert and overlapped with HN87, whose cover name was John Lipscomb, HN1, cover name Matt Rayner, John Dines, Andrew Coles, Trevor Morris, and Peter Francis. And all of those officers have accepted, save for Andrew Coles, all of those officers have accepted being engaged in sexual relationships or having had sexual encounters whilst deployed. It says in a statement. No, I said relationship or encounter. Whilst on the STS, were you aware of any of your contemporaries having been involved in sexual relationships or encounters in their cover identities whilst deployed?
No.
This isn't just one or two individuals. This is a handful of individuals, HM122. Are you sure that this sort of activity wasn't known about within the unit?
Certainly not by me.
Can we stick to the document that we have on screen, please, and look at page 3? And at the top of page 3, we can see that it says this: no talks from SMT in respect of sexual relationships. New JD, JD being the initials of John Dines, new JD close to HS, HS being an abbreviation, initials of Helen Steele. Made no secret of it, bravado, not to indicate he was having a relationship, that he was close to the leadership and that's where he had to be. He did target to get the information. Sexually, don't know, doubt it. Do you see that, HM12?
Yes.
What did you mean when you said in 2013, bravado not to indicate he was having a relationship?
I think there was some bawdy comments made simply because it was such a small group that he was infiltrating.
Bawdy comment made by him or somebody else?
Could be either.
Can you remember the nature of the comment?
No, but it was within character for him to make such a comment. But at the time, I didn't take it to mean that he was having a relationship.
Can you remember the gist, or can you recollect any idea of the sense of the comment?
No, I'm afraid not.
Could it have alluded to the possibility of him being involved in sexual activity with John Dines, being involved in sexual activity with Helen Steele?
I suppose, well, I don't remember the comment, so I can't really answer that.
Are you sure you don't remember HM122?
I don't recall anything beyond what is said there. That seems a fair representation of what I could remember at the time.
Was John Dines close to the STS leadership?
Not especially that I know of.
Why is it recorded in this document that he was close to the leadership and that's where he had to be?
That's the leadership of the group that he was
I see.
infiltrating.
All right. So leadership of the group as opposed to the management in the STS.
Yes.
I understand. What did you mean by... what did you mean when you said he did target to get the information?
In order to get the information he was tasked to gather, then he had to be close to a very small group of people of the leadership of that group.
In your witness statement, you say the first you knew about John Dines' relationship with Helen Steele was when you were visited by someone from the office shortly before the story broke in the press because of the techniques that were used in tracking John Dines down. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Yes. Given that you knew that John Dines and Helen Steele were close and you'd heard this bawdy comment, as you term it, are you sure that this was the first that you'd heard or got the impression, at least, that there'd been some sort of relationship between the pair?
Yes.
Being careful about names, please. Can you remember who visited you at home about this?
No.
Can you remember when it took place? I know you say shortly before. the story broke in the press. Are you able to date that at all?
No, I'm afraid not.
Were you told anything about the relationship between John Dines and Helen Steele at that stage?
Only that one had existed.
And why did what had happened to John Dines lead to a visit to you? What was the reason for somebody coming to see you about this?
Well, apart from generally to keep me informed of press interest, but specifically I think it was to do with the use of cover identities.
I suppose I ought to make it clear, I assume this was somebody from the police who came to visit you.
Yes.
All right. Bob Lambert was someone you say in your witness statement you only really knew of through other people's comments. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Can you remember anything about the sort of comments you heard about Bob Lambert?
Only in terms of his deployment and that he was highly thought of.
Can we stick to the document, please, that we just had on the screen? And if we look at page 5 of that document, please. Towards the top of page 5, it says BL, so Bob Lambert's initials. Quite unique, demanded commendations. You owe us something for this. Did you see that record there?
Yes.
What did you mean by this?
I don't know. I don't recall that conversation.
How did you come to learn that Lambert had demanded commendations as recorded in this document?
I don't believe he did.
Has the author of this document got it wrong then?
I think he must have done.
Did you know that Bob Lambert had received a commendation for his service in the STS?
Yes.
Did you have an understanding of the circumstances in which he received that commendation, or for the reasons for it?
In very general terms.
Did you know when that occurred?
No.
One other officer I want to ask you about is HN11, who was before your time. His real name is Mike Chitty, cover name Mike Blake, who was deployed between 1983 and 1987 in the animal rights field. Now, you mention in your witness statement that at a social event sometime after you left the STS, you were aware of allegations about Mike Chitty continuing to live in his cover identity. Do you remember that? Do you remember
Yes.
saying that? Can you remember how you were made aware of this?
Not specifically. I think I asked someone who I thought might know what it was, and they gave me some outline as to what had happened.
Does it follow that you must have heard something because you asked somebody else to tell you what it was all about?
I was aware that people had mentioned the name Mike Chitty, but I didn't know why or under what circumstances, other than it was something awkward or bad. But I'd never inquired previously because I didn't know the man or expect to meet him.
Were you made aware of any allegation that he engaged in sexual activity whilst deployed?
No.
How do you feel about the fact that amongst those that you served with were undercover officers who had sexual encounters or entered into sexual relationships with members of the public whilst deployed?
I was shocked, simply because I had no idea that they were doing so.
How do you feel about the fact that this sort of conduct took place under the auspices of the Special Demonstration Squad?
Well, clearly it shouldn't have.
Now, you told us a little earlier about bill posting being an activity that undercover officers may have to engage in whilst deployed. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you ever engage or encourage any criminal activity whilst you were deployed?
In terms of bill posting, yes, I took part in that.
Took part in it. Did you ever encourage anybody else to take part in bill posting?
No, that wouldn't have arisen.
You said in your witness statement that low-level activity might be justified, but nothing more serious like assault and things like that. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Where did you get this understanding? In other words, the distinction between low-level activity being perhaps tolerable but more serious crime not.
I'm pretty sure that would have been conversations with managers.
Did you engage in anything other than bill posting?
No.
Can you remember how regularly you were involved in activity, bill posting activity?
I couldn't put a figure on it beyond perhaps once a month for a short period.
And did this apply to both groups that you infiltrated?
No, I don't believe it applied to Class 4.
So just the Revolutionary Communist Party?
Yes,
And you think about once a month?
possibly.
All right. Just want to explore with you something you said in your witness statement, which is at paragraph 30. It starts at page 9, goes across to page 10. And what you said was that as far as encouraging others to commit offences, paraphrasing here, it was only justifiable for offences of the most minor character, and only when there was no other realistic method of maintaining cover. Do you remember saying that?
To an extent, yes.
Does it follow that it was your understanding that there were occasions where it may be appropriate or permissible to encourage others to engage in criminal conduct?
In terms of the bill posting, when I say encourage, I was not in a position to organise and encourage people in that sense. But if I was asked to come bill posting and to ask somebody else to come as well, then I would do that.
Was your understanding that this was only permissible in respect of bill posting, or was there any other sort of minor offending that it might be appropriate to involve yourself in encouragement or anything like that?
Well, I recall it specifically in this because it was an inevitable activity that I would have to engage in, but it was explained to me that a minor infringement might be justified, but a serious offence would not.
Are you aware as to whether any of your colleagues encouraged others to commit criminal offences?
No.
And forgive me if I didn't understand you correctly, but was it your evidence that any encouragement you may have been involved in was restricted to bill posting and restricted to perhaps asking others to come along, something like that?
Yes.
And what was the how would it be justifiable? What was the reason for encouraging somebody else to engage in something like bill posting? Why would you feel you'd have to do that?
If I was asked to come out of an evening of bill posting,
Yes.
and asked to ask somebody else to come, which you would then say was I was encouraging them, if I was to refuse, it would immediately prompt the question why.
I see. Are you not able to say to whoever's asking you to do the asking, well, that's a matter for them, or if you want them to come along,
You
it's up
could.
to you?
You could.
Did you apply your mind to doing that?
Yes, you could.
Looking back, do you think that might have been a more appropriate course to take as opposed to inviting somebody else to come along and commit a criminal offence, albeit low level?
No.
Why do you not think it would have been more appropriate to try and avoid having to ask somebody else to get involved?
It's a balance between what I'm asking them to do and maintaining the cover that I have and not jeopardising it.
You'd still be involved in the activity yourself, wouldn't you, regardless of whether the other individual agreed or not? Is that fair? You'd taken the decision that you would bill post.
Yes.
Wasn't that enough to maintain your cover, to show your credentials to members of your group?
It would entirely depend upon the circumstances at the time, the way it was asked, how it was asked, what my standing was at that time. I can't give a generic answer to that.
Were you ever arrested whilst deployed
No.
into a group? Were you ever the subject of any criminal proceedings in court in relation to activity that you were involved in whilst deployed?
No.
Can we look again at the document 0738101, please? MPS 0738101. So back to the manuscript notes, please. And this time, this is at B46 of the hard copy bundle. This time, please, page 4. And just below centre of the page, we can see a sentence that says, fly posting would go through process, use cover name and pay fine and be reimbursed. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you remember what you meant by that?
It's simply as part of the discussions with managers before I was deployed that minor offences like fly posting, our instruction was to maintain our cover, go through a ticket or bail or whatever it was, and that if we were fined for the fly posting, that would be reimbursed.
Can you remember if anything was said to you by your managers about whether it was permissible to, other than what you've just told us, whether it was permissible to engage in or encourage criminal conduct whilst deployed? Can you remember if anything else was said to you by your managers?
Not offhand.
Can you remember if anything was said to you what you're supposed to do if you're arrested?
That if it was a minor matter such as this, which wouldn't be a prolonged detention, so you should inform the office as soon as you were released on bail or without charge. But if you were in custody for a length of time, you should try and contact the office. Did
you ever apply your mind to the legality of being processed in your cover name? Because, of course, it wasn't your real name.
No, I didn't.
No. Is there any reason you didn't think about that?
Sorry, a reason I didn't?
You didn't think about whether it was proper or not if you were arrested by the authorities to give a cover name instead of your real name?
It was simply, I didn't consider the legal implications of it. It was simply an essential way of you either give up your real name there and then, and that's the end of your operations, or you maintain it through the process.
And did you appreciate that if you chose to maintain the cover name, that would be misleading?
I didn't have any great in-depth thoughts on it.
Was anything said to you by colleagues or managers about appearing in court in your cover identity?
No.
Did you consider, if the situation were to arise, did you ever apply your mind to the propriety of attending court in your cover name? In other words, again, the fact that the court would be misled. Did you ever think about that?
The situation never arose. I didn't consider it.
But it must have been obvious to you that there was a risk that the situation might come up.
If that was a risk, then we would have discussed it with the management.
Did you have any concerns about what to do in the event of court proceedings being commenced against you?
It wasn't something I considered, no.
Did you know whether fines were paid by the undercover officer and then reimbursed by the SDS office?
I'm not aware of a particular example, no.
So that's advice as opposed to something you had experienced of?
Yes.
All right. And you've told us about what you say was the importance of maintaining cover in these sorts of scenarios and the importance of maintaining of using the cover name to maintain cover. You're aware, and we'll get onto the subject in due course, that it was common practice at your time in the STS to use a deceased child's identity as a cover name. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you ever apply your mind to the fact that if somebody was arrested, processed, proceeded against in court, that there was a risk that certainly police records would be created in the real child's identity, in the child's real identity, forgive me, and possibly a criminal record created in that identity? Did that ever cross your mind?
Yes.
And why did you think that it would be appropriate to proceed in the way that you had been told that you should, when there was this risk that somebody wholly innocent might be tainted with a police or criminal record?
Because the way I constructed the cover identity precluded that as a possibility. Forgive me, did you ever consider that there might be an impact on the family of a deceased child? For example, let's say somebody is processed in their cover identity and they don't turn up for court. There may be bail inquiries at the child's known address, police officers knocking on the door of the family of the deceased child. Is that something you ever applied your mind to? I'm sorry, you're asking me to comment on things I didn't do.
No, but there were things that you were told that to maintain cover if these sort of things came up.
To a certain extent.
Yes. So did you ever apply your mind to look, if I'm in this situation, I have to maintain cover. These are the possible consequences for other people. Did that ever cross your mind at all?
As I say, the way I constructed my cover identity, that couldn't have happened.
All right. Well, we'll get onto that in due course. I think you had, before your deployment, you had some people would say mentor, some I think use the term point of contact in an officer, HN19, is that right? Don't give us the name, please, but you can check.
Yes.
Were you aware that HN19 was arrested and cautioned for bill posting whilst he was deployed?
No.
Do you ever ask his advice as to what to do if you were arrested?
Don't believe so, no.
So I'm moving on to another topic. Is that a convenient moment?
Certainly. We normally have a break of 15 minutes at this point in the morning. I trust that will be sufficient for your purposes.
Yes.
Good. We'll adjourn for 15 minutes.
Agreeable. HN 122, was there any training or guidance provided as to what to do if you became privy to material or information that attracted legal professional privilege?
Not beyond what every officer would receive.
So nothing specific to undercover work or your SDS deployment?
No.
Did you have any such training before you joined the SDS?
Yes.
And what did you understand privileged material information to involve?
But communications between a lawyer and their client.
Did you ever come across information that you considered might be subject to privilege whilst you were deployed?
No.
Did you ever attend meetings where legal matters were discussed, maybe, for example, following someone's arrest or something like that?
Not that I recall, no.
If such material or information came to your attention, would you have considered it appropriate to report on it?
Yes.
Why?
The decision as to what should happen to it then would be taken by those officers dealing with the information.
Did you never exercise your own judgment as to what intelligence you should include in an intelligence report and what you should leave out?
Generally speaking, no.
Did you receive any guidance or training on racial equality or racism whilst you were in the SDS?
Not whilst on SDS, no.
Did you receive any in advance of joining?
In terms of what all police officers receive, yes.
Did you ever witness any racist or racially discriminatory conduct whilst you were serving on the SDS or in Special Branch or in the wider Metropolitan Police Service?
Throughout my service, you mean?
Yes, within London.
Yes.
You did. What sort of racist conduct did you come across?
Comments made by other officers outside of Special Branch.
And what sort of comments did you hear?
Derogatory comments about black or Asian people.
Did you ever challenge such comments?
Yes.
What was the reaction of those to you challenging them?
Without thinking of specific examples, they simply wouldn't make those comments in front of me again.
Did you ever report individuals who made comments like that to your superiors?
Yes.
Do you remember if your superiors took action over comments?
Not specifically, no.
It's my fault for clumsy question. Are you saying you don't remember or that they didn't take action?
I don't recall any specific details, or I don't recall any particular disciplinary action that took place.
What about informal action? Do you remember if anyone was ever, any supervising officer had a word with somebody else?
That was my assumption.
Your service as an SDS undercover officer overlapped with a black officer called Trevor Morris. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Being careful as to names, please, were you aware of any issues in relation to race that involved Trevor Morris and anyone else in SDS management?
No.
It's been suggested by Mr. Morris, and it's supported by Peter Francis, that HN 86, as they're known in this inquiry, credited another officer with intelligence in relation to the Welling riots that was provided by Morris.
Pause a moment while he looks at the...
Forgive me.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes. So it's been suggested by Mr. Morris, and this is supported by Peter Francis, that HN 86 credited another officer with intelligence that related to the Welling riots that was provided by Trevor Morris, and that this was motivated by racism. Did you know anything about this?
No.
Did you have any experience of HN86 demonstrating racist behaviour or conduct?
No.
Did you ever hear that he did?
No.
Could we bring up again, please, the manuscript note, MPS 0738101? This is a B46 of the hard copy bundle. And on page 2, please, just towards the top, this is what's recorded when dealing with your early career. About 3 lines down, we can see there, it says there, posted C Squad, Blacks and Browns desk, single issue anti-racist groups, closed end mid-1990s. Do you see that?
Yes.
Sorry, 1980s, I'm corrected, thank you. And I think in your witness statement, you say that you worked on a C Squad desk that monitored extreme left-wing attempts to take over local community groups. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And is that a reference to the same desk that's being referred to in this document?
It is.
Thank you. Was it the activities of single-issue anti-racist groups that Special Branch was looking into, or was it the influence of other groups on them?
We were looking at the, generally speaking, extreme left-wing attempts at infiltration.
Is there a reason why that's not recorded in the Operation Hearn document and the description of the desk is limited to single-issue anti-racist groups?
I don't know.
Can you recollect any of the groups that that desk was looking into? Can you remember the names of any of them?
Quite possibly Socialist Workers' Party.
And what about the anti-racist or community groups? Can you remember any of those?
There were campaigns around Newham 7, Newham 8, I recall.
Right. So, Hackney Community Defence Association, did that ever come across that desk?
Possibly.
Southall Monitoring Group, do you remember them?
Yes.
Newham Monitoring Project?
Yes.
Right. Is the term blacks and browns, is that your terminology?
It was the common name referencing the desk.
Why was the desk referred to as blacks and browns?
They were the victims of the extreme left-wing infiltration.
Would you accept that to refer to these groups as blacks and browns is to use racist terminology?
It certainly, by today's standards, would be racist, but our understanding at that time was different.
Would you accept that by any standards of any time in the last 40, 50, 60 years or so, that using terminology like that to describe a segment of society is racist and unacceptable?
It certainly is now. At the time, I think most people's understanding was that if you use such terminology without trying to be derogatory or divisive, then it was acceptable. And over time, I think there's been a growing awareness that actually it's not. It is offensive and shouldn't be used.
I mean, anti-racist groups and local community groups weren't necessarily entirely made up of people from minority backgrounds, were they?
No, but we weren't looking at the support groups.
No, you say you were looking at the groups that were trying to influence them, is that right?
Yes.
Does that make this terminology even less necessary in that context?
It was simply shorthand to describe that particular desk.
Was the use of this expression HM122, was it indicative of racist attitudes prevalent within the Metropolitan Police Service at the time?
No, as I say, we weren't looking at black and brown groups. We were looking at extreme left-wing infiltration of those groups.
Then why use the terminology black and brown at all?
It was the terminology that existed when I went there.
Did you receive any guidance or training on sex discrimination or gender equality whilst you were on the SDS?
No.
Did you witness or hear about any sexist conduct whilst you were serving with the Metropolitan Police Service?
Yes.
What sort of conduct did you witness?
Derogatory comments.
About women?
Yes.
Did you challenge such comments when you heard them?
Yes.
Did you report those who made such comments to your superiors?
On occasion, yes.
Are you aware whether on those occasions any action was taken against the individuals who made such comments?
I'm not aware of formal action, no.
All right. Informal action?
I believed so at the time, yes.
Did this extend to your service on the SDS?
No, not that I recall.
You say in your witness statement, if it assists you, it's at paragraph 36 at page 11, that society's views generally were quite different and some more recent diversity concepts had not been invented nor had the training to go with it. Do you remember saying that in your witness statement?
Was that fact, yes.
Why did you feel the need to say that society's views were different in the context of addressing racism and sexism within the police?
I think I was specifically asked to make a comment.
Can you explain what you mean by the expression recent diversity concepts?
Well, in that appreciation of what and what is not offensive has developed over years.
Would you not accept that there has been an appreciation of diversity for many years now?
It's constantly changed and developed, yes.
Would you accept that appreciation extended to back to when you were serving on the Metropolitan Police Service?
Yes, but I think then it was regarded as good manners or good behaviour as opposed to something offensive.
In building your legend in preparation to deploy undercover, you used the name of a deceased child, in part, and took on the cover name of Neil Richardson. Is that right?
That's right.
Were you told to use a deceased child's identity, or was this something you decided to do off your own bat?
No, it was suggested to me in order to obtain certain documentation.
Being careful as to names, please, can you remember who suggested this tactic to you?
No.
Can you remember if it was a fellow undercover officer, somebody in the back office, or somebody in management?
Not specifically, no.
Can you remember whether you were given any advice as to how to identify an identity and the sort of factors you might want to take into account when selecting one?
Yes, I don't remember the specific advice, but certainly there was some.
And does it follow from your early answers you won't be able to assist with who gave you that sort of advice?
No.
Was there any written guidance on the use of a deceased child's identity that was available to you?
No.
Can you remember if there's anything like that in a ring binder or a folder or anything similar available to SDS officers?
Not that I recall, no.
Now, I think you explained in your witness statement that you attended St Catherine's House, the Register of Births and Deaths, in order to research an identity for you to use. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And you also explain in your witness statement that you think that you didn't use the surname of the deceased child, but probably either made a surname up or combined the first name and date of birth of the deceased child with either the maiden name of the child's mother or details of another record. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And do you remember saying in your witness statement that you thought it was more likely that you lifted the surname from another record? Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And why do you think it was more likely that you combined these details from more than one record?
I was attempting to remember where I'd chosen the name from. I don't have an exact recollection where I got it.
Did you discuss this method of putting together an identity, in other words, a real first name and date of birth together with an unrelated surname? Do you remember discussing that with your managers?
Yes.
Were they supportive of this tactic?
Yes.
Did you obtain copies of the child's birth and death certificates?
I don't recall, but quite likely, yes.
Can you remember whether such documents would be kept by you or with the SDS office?
Certainly not by me.
Can you remember what happened to such documents at the conclusion of a deployment?
No.
Now, you explain in your witness statement that the Revolutionary Communist Party, the first group that you deployed to, had security procedures that meant your cover name was likely to be checked. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And you went on to say that fabricating this detail, so in other words, using an unassociated surname, provided a safety net and that it was important to have a watertight cover story. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
How would it have provided a safety net?
If they had checked for a record of the birth under that name and date of birth, they wouldn't have found one. And my expectation was that I would then be challenged on that. I would then give an explanation that it was a mother's maiden name. Whilst they went away to check that, would give me an opportunity to safely withdraw.
Did you know whether, as part of their security procedures, the RCP checked birth certificates?
I'm aware that they knew about it, about that method. It was widely known, and that they had the capability of doing so. Whether they actually ever did or not, I don't know.
Did you think that there was a chance the group might check the birth certificate in your case?
Yes.
And you've just told us the reason you used the unassociated surname was to buy you a bit of time.
Yes.
In that event, is that right? If the name was ultimately partly based on the identity of a deceased child and partly fabricated, what was the purpose of using any part of a real identity in the first place?
I can't recall which documentation it was, but there was one particular documentation that could not be obtained without a genuine name and date of birth. All the others could be obtained and the surnames changed.
Whilst you were on the SDS, were you ever made aware of an undercover police officer known to the inquirer as HN 297, real name Richard Clark, cover name Rick Gibson, who deployed in the mid-70s? Was that somebody who you were ever made aware of?
I know the name.
Were you made aware of this individual having been confronted by his own birth and death certificates by an activist, which led to his withdrawal from the field?
No.
Just want to show you one document, not in the hard copy bundle, it's in a loose leaf document, sir, for you. It's MPS 0731061. And if we can go to page 14, please. Now, this particular record, dated the 26th of September 1989, and it was a record made of the possibility of a television documentary, possibly involving the activist that exposed Richard Clarke, being made. So, latter part 1989 is when you deployed, is that right?
That's right.
Were you ever made aware that there was this possibility of this TV documentary being made that may touch on the fact that Richard Clarke's cover identity had been compromised? Were you ever made aware of that?
No.
I just want to look at one thing the author of this document says at it's bullet point 2, just centre of the page. It says, upon receipt of this, apprise current SDS officers through ADCI HM 109 and reinforce the instructions already given them regarding their contact with police personnel, etc. Did you see that?
Yes.
Were you ever appraised of this situation?
With Richard Clarke, no.
Does it follow that, certainly in your case then, this particular plan of action wasn't carried out? Nobody told you that there was a documentary possibly to be aired, possibly carried a risk of exposure of the deceased child identity tactic?
Well, I'm not sure the context, but that point 2 says reinforce instructions of their contact with police personnel, etc. That may have happened. I don't recall it.
I see.
But not in the context of D.I. Clarke.
I appreciate your evidence is that you weren't aware of this, but would you agree that this sort of development, so TV programme touching on this subject, ought to be something that should have been of concern to your superiors? Would you agree with that?
Certainly SDS should have been told. It would be their judgment as to what we needed to know and at what time.
Would you have expected in those circumstances SDS management to have had a rethink about the use of the deceased child's identity tactic?
I don't know the circumstances. I can't really comment what they should or shouldn't have done.
Can we look, please, now at MPS 0723156, which is at B1 of the hard copy bundle. Now, these are the diary notes of Martin Gray, who is one of the officers that you've told us recruited you into the SDS. And if we I just want to look at page 3 with you, please. And we can see just above centre, there's a record for July 1989, Saturday the 1st, HN 122 OMPD to Durham. Do you see that?
Yes.
And OMPD, I think, means outside Metropolitan Police District. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. And then below that, August 1989, Wednesday the 16th, another entry, HN 122 OMPD Kent. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, I think part of your legend was that you had spent your school or your formative years in Kent. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do you recollect travelling to Kent?
Not specifically, no.
No. So, do you accept, having refreshed your memory from this record, that you did travel to Kent?
Yes,
Can you remember why you went there?
to familiarise myself with landmarks or anything that somebody of that age would be expected to remember, whether it's the name of the shopping centre or the local football team or whatever.
Can you remember if you went alone or with anybody else?
I don't recall, no.
Can you remember how much time you spent there?
No.
Can you remember what it is, other than what you've already told us, what it is you did whilst you were there?
No, it was simply that, so that I could talk reasonably as if I had lived there.
Now, Durham, which is the other area referred to, that was the area where the birth and death of the child whose identity you used was registered. Is that right? Isn't
That's right.
All right. Do you recollect travelling to Durham?
No.
Do you accept that the document supports that you did?
Yes.
Can you remember the reason why you went to Durham?
Of the same reason, to familiarise myself with those things somebody would be expected to remembered at that age.
Can you remember if you went alone or with anyone else?
I don't recall that.
Can you remember how much time you spent there?
Less than a day, I think.
Can you remember what it is you did, other than what you've already told us, whilst you were there?
No.
Given that your legend was that your formative years were spent in Kent, was there really any reason to familiarise yourself with aspects of the Durham area? Because following your legend through, you would have been very, very young.
Yes.
Before moving to Kent. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Yes. So was there any real reason to go up to Durham, to familiarise yourself with the area?
Simply because I didn't know the area at all. And even though my cover was that I'd left there at a young age, it would still be reasonable to expect somebody to have a certain amount of knowledge or familiarity with names.
Was another reason to visit that area to check if the family of the deceased child was still connected to the address on the birth certificate?
No.
Are you sure about that?
Totally.
Did you undertake any research of the home address of the deceased child?
No.
Did you attend the home address?
No.
Did you undertake any research into the family of the child?
No.
Did you undertake any research into any other aspect of the child's life?
No.
Do you know if regional special branch was ever tasked to look into the deceased child's family and their circumstances?
Certainly not by me.
Do you know if anyone else might have tasked them to do so?
No.
Would you have expected such inquiries to have been made?
No.
Was it suggested to you that these trips, these familiarisation trips, as you term them, were something that you ought to do, or was that a decision you made for yourself?
I think it was probably suggested in general conversations about what happens if somebody says they come from the same place.
And you said in your witness statement that there was at least one question and answer session with one of the managers to test whether your legend was sufficiently well thought through. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Now, other than this question and answer session, were you aware whether your managers did anything independently to test the viability of your cover identity?
No,
Is that no, they didn't, or no, you're not aware?
I'm not aware.
See. Did you consider if there was any risk to the deceased child's family as a result of your use of the identity?
The only risk would be if somebody had identified that particular document, which I say I can't remember which one it was,
Yes.
had discovered that, but there was no reason to suppose how anybody could do so.
What about if somebody had put two and two together, in other words, located the birth certificate where the first name and the date of birth matched, all right? Did it ever occur to you that they may use that document to locate the family?
There's no reason to suppose they could have located that document. They would never have known the names.
Why do you say that?
They would never have known the name on the birth certificate.
Because you use the unrelated surname, is that what you're
Yes.
saying? But let's say the best they could do was find a match to the first name and the date of birth. Did that ever apply? Did you ever apply your mind to that?
There's no reason to think that they would, having discovered a false surname, then assume that the date of birth and first name were absolutely correct.
So does it follow you say you didn't consider that there was any risk to the family of the deceased child?
Yes.
Did you consider any alternative use to the deceased child's identity in creating your own cover identity?
Yes, the alternative was to not have documentation.
Were you comfortable with the use of the deceased child identity tactic?
I can't say I was comfortable with it, but it was the only option I had if I was to successfully deploy.
What made you uncomfortable?
It's not pleasant to use a child's identity, especially when they've died at such a young age.
I just want to take you to documents not in the hard copy bundle, so you have this in loose leaf. References MPS 0728969. Zero 728969. This is the SCS annual report for 1994 and 1995, so a little while after the conclusion of your deployment, all right, HM122. And I just want to look at what it says, please, on yes, page 17 to start. All right, page 18, please, actually. Thank you. So it's 18 on the system, 17 on the document. And document says this, beginning at paragraph 10.1. Management have conducted a thorough review of all cover documentation available to support a field officer's bona fides. One established practice has been discontinued and new procedures have been introduced. Research in this important area will continue in the year ahead. Starting undercover duties in November 1994, HN26 became the first field officer never to run a risk of one day being confronted with a death certificate in her cover name. That is to say, she has adopted a new system which does not involve obtaining cover details in the name of someone whose birth and death is recorded in official records at St Catherine's House. And then over the page at paragraph 10.5, The adoption of purely fictional cover identities has an overriding advantage for the security of the STS operation. Faced with suspicion and distrust, a field officer may never satisfy a hostile inquirer who has reason to believe he has uncovered a police informer. An officer's useful intelligence gathering role may be at an end. However, if the inquirer is unable to reach a definite conclusion, as in finding a death certificate for the person under suspicion, he remains dealing with the more general problem of a possible informer as opposed to an undercover spy. Thus, this strategy seeks to address a worst-case scenario and prevent a hostile group obtaining valuable information about the methods of the SDS. Now, during your time in the field at HN 122, were you ever made aware of a possible move away from the use of the deceased child's identity tactic?
No.
Careful as to names, please, but you had a colleague, HN 56, who was in the back office, I think, mid-1989, deployed early 1990. I'll just let you catch up at HN 56. And that individual's deployment concluded in early 1991 and overlapped with yours. Do you remember HN 56?
I recognise the name, but I don't recall him, no.
Were you aware that that individual used a wholly fictitious identity that he's told us was prompted by HN 109?
No.
Do you remember whether you had any conversation with him as to how to create a cover identity?
No.
Are you able to say why a wholly fictitious identity was considered to be a viable proposition for him but not for you?
I don't know what organisation he was covering, and for the one I was looking at, I'd be subjected to a security interview where the documentation could be checked.
Do you accept that the use of a wholly fictitious identity would have been less risky because it couldn't have been verified at all against genuine birth and death records? And by verified, I mean even in part, with reference to that combination of the first and birth and date of first name and date of birth.
Yes, it would have been much preferable to use that, but you wouldn't have any documentation to back up your identity.
Another one of your colleagues, HN25, please don't use the real name, but I'll just give you a moment just to look it up.
Yes.
Now, when HN25 was interviewed by Operation Hearn, he asserted that if an organisation was looking into your date of birth, it was his view that it was all over. That's what he told Operation Hearn. Did you agree with that?
It may have been true with his group, but the issue with the RCP was that they had a security officer for the branch and who conducted a security interview where they asked for your documentation.
Now, I'm going to ask you a bit more on this topic a little later, but you had later down the line, after the conclusion of your deployment, you had a mentee or a point of contact, I think you used that term, called Mark Jenner. Do you remember Mark Jenner?
Yes.
And Mark Jenner used a wholly fictitious cover identity. Were you aware of that?
No.
Did you ever have any discussion with him or provide any advice as to establishing his cover identity?
No, my role was purely pastoral.
Did you ever consider, at the time that you used the deceased child's identity, did you ever consider the possibility of being found out by the family at some stage that the identity had been used? Is that something that crossed your mind?
No, I had no reason to think that they would.
We know now that some of the families are aware of the use of the tactic. Did you at the time ever consider the sorrow suffered by the child's family?
Yes, of course.
How did that make you feel?
As I say, I was uncomfortable with it, but felt that I had no choice.
Can you remember the cause of death of the child whose identity you used?
No.
The cause of death was progressive cerebral sclerosis. At the time that you used the identity, did you have any understanding of what that was?
No.
Do you have any understanding of what that condition is now?
Not particularly, no, other than what I've read.
Progressive cerebral sclerosis is a neurodegenerative disease. Did the child's cause of death ever make you think twice about using his identity?
No.
Did his condition ever make you think about the anguish that it must have caused to his family?
Beyond the anguish that the death of any child would cause, not specifically that condition, no.
The inquiry has obtained a witness statement from the child's mother. Have you considered the evidence of the impact of your use of Neil Robin Martin's identity that she has provided?
I saw the statement yesterday.
Is there anything that you wish to say to her or Neil's surviving siblings, given your use of her son's details?
I think she makes clear in her statement that an apology would not assist her, but that what she really wanted was answers to some questions, and I'm quite happy to give those answers.
Now, in your witness statement, you describe how you had a number of bedsits or one-bedroom flats as cover accommodation during your deployment. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Can I just look at one address, please, that is recorded that you used whilst you were targeted against class war? And that document, please, MPS 05270079, so that's B8 of the hard copy bundle. MPS 05270079. I'll just wait for the system to catch up. Thank you. Now, do you see the cover address is recorded there as 39 Ferrer Road, London, in the E8 postal area?
Yes.
Now, HM122. Others have done some research into this address and have located a Ferren Road in E5 and a Farrer Road in N8, but no Ferrer Road. Can you remember the correct address where you were living in your cover identity at this time?
No.
So if I was to ask you whether this document presents an accurate record or not as to where you were living at the time you were deployed into class war, you wouldn't be able to assist me, is that right?
No, I'm afraid not.
All right. Now, something else you explain in your witness statement is how the RCP's vetting process involves a home visit, so a visit to your cover accommodation, is that right?
Yes.
So we've moved backwards from class war to the RCP. And you go on to explain in your witness statement that this meant you spent a lot of time at your cover accommodation at the beginning of your deployment. Is that right?
That's right.
Was that sort of visit, was it carried out unexpectedly or arranged?
Unexpectedly.
Because it was unexpected, did you alter the pattern of what you were doing to try to ensure that you were at your cover accommodation when the RCP called?
Yes.
Does that mean you stayed in a lot at the beginning of your deployment?
I would have gone to that address at times that would be expected, yes.
And what sort of times were those?
Well, there could be good reasons for being out during the day at work and potentially during part of the evening, potentially for short times at the weekend, but the same as anyone lives an ordinary life.
Do you accept that you spent prolonged time at the cover address in the event that the RCP may have come to test the veracity of it?
Yes.
Yes. Did you consider that a productive use of your time?
It was a necessary use.
Presumably the RCP members were aware that you had a job or a cover job.
Yes.
So they wouldn't have expected you necessarily to be at home at any given time. Is that fair?
That's right, yeah.
Was there really any need to sort of hang around the flat in those early days just to make sure that you were there to deal with the visit as and when it took place?
Yes.
Can you remember how much time you spent waiting for the RCP to
No,
come
it was
over?
only a short period after the security interview, up until they did visit.
By short period, can you assist us with how long you mean?
I don't recall exactly, but a matter of weeks.
Weeks, all right. You worked in the SDS back office before being deployed, is that right?
Yes.
And that work included helping with intelligence reports that had been prepared by undercover officers who were in the field at the time, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you ever read those reports?
Yes.
Did you ever feel the need to address the necessity of the content?
No.
Did you ever take the view that there was too much going in or not enough going in?
No, my role was purely administrative for the reports.
Did the tone of some of the reports that came across your desk ever concern you?
Not that I recall.
As a result of this role, did you come to understand who the consumers of SDS intelligence were, where the reports were going?
I was aware that they were going back to Special Branch and some of them, perhaps most of them, to the Security Service.
I see. Was there a house style for the drafting of intelligence reports?
There were certain elements of style, but generally speaking, it was whatever the officer had written.
I see. So some elements of style carried through, but
Well, there was
others not.
there was formatting.
I see. And did you learn how to draft intelligence reports before joining the SDS or during?
My duties had already included writing intelligence reports.
And were intelligence reports that you wrote up before joining the SDS, were they written up in the same way or were they written up differently?
There were some formatting differences, but otherwise no.
Okay. Being careful as to names, please. Were you responsible for producing the final typed reports for the SDS?
I don't recall exactly. I think that was perhaps one of the sergeants.
I see. So not you, you weren't responsible for that, one of the sergeants, you think?
I don't recall.
Have you ever heard of intelligence reports being sanitised?
Yes.
What did you understand was meant by the sanitisation of a report?
To remove any references that might identify the author.
I see. And can you remember at what stage of the process, if it occurred, this sanitisation would take place? Would it be by you as the author, or would it be after you submitted your report, or do you simply not know?
Are we still talking about back office? Or?
Yes, back office, please.
I might have done some sanitising under supervision.
And when you're in the field?
I wouldn't sanitise it in the field. I would submit whatever I thought was relevant, and if I wasn't sure, I would include it and let others make that decision.
Now, I think you tell us in your witness statement that you would provide your intelligence whilst in the field now in a narrative form and handwritten, although sometimes you may have produced some on your home computer. Is that right?
Yes.
And did other members of your family use that computer?
No.
Did you take any precautions to ensure that nobody else had access to the information that was any information related to your deployment that was on that computer?
No, it was used. I was using it as a typewriter, if you like. There was nothing stored on there.
Did you ever retain information on the computer?
No.
And I think you say in your witness statement that you reported what you observed and left it to your managers and others to determine the relevance of the information that you supplied. Is that right?
Yes.
Does it follow from that that you would record everything you could remember about your observations in the field, say at a particular event or meeting? You would record as much detail as you could recollect?
Yes.
And I think you've told us that you weren't applying any filter to the information that you were including in reports. You left that for others to determine.
Well, I wouldn't include anything I felt to be completely irrelevant.
I
But,
see. So there was some assessment of relevance when you were
Yes.
writing these reports. All right. And was it a consequence of this approach that sometimes people's personal, private and sensitive details might end up in a written intelligence report?
yes.
Once you were in the field, did you ever receive feedback on the content of your reporting?
Unofficial feedback, certainly in relation to public order intelligence, yes.
Can you remember how regularly you received feedback?
It would only be at a significant public order event, so not a monthly event.
I see. And were you ever, was it ever suggested to you that you were including insufficient detail in your reports?
Not that I recall, no.
Ever suggested to you that you were including too much or unnecessary detail in your reports?
No.
You were paid overtime in your role as an SDS undercover officer, is that right?
Yes.
And I think you explain in your witness statement that it made a significant increase to your take-home pay. At most, may have increased your pay packet, you say, by about 60%. Do you remember saying that?
That wasn't my estimate, but yes, I agreed with it.
All right. Whose estimate was that?
Whoever I was talking to at that time.
I see. Was anything said to you about opportunities to work overtime whilst you're being recruited into the SDS?
It was implicit in the idea that I'd be working extended hours and away from home.
And was the opportunity for overtime or the potential for increased earnings, was that something that attracted you to the undercover role?
It was an obvious benefit, but wasn't the reason I undertook it, no.
Are you aware whether any of your colleagues, any other undercover officers, took into account the potential to earn more when deciding to take on the role?
I'm not aware of any example, but I'm aware there are other roles within the special branch, indeed the police, that would earn more.
At an equivalent rank or level?
Yes.
I think you explained in your witness statement there was a cap on overtime of 115 hours a month on average. Is that right?
Yes.
Are you aware as to whether this cap affected or had any impact on recruitment into the SDS?
I don't know. I wasn't aware of the cap before I was joined SDS anyway.
You say in your witness statement that you were not permitted to claim more hours than you worked, but you also had to stay within the cap, making it sometimes difficult to reduce the time recorded into the diary into line with the cap while remaining consistent with your reporting. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
What did you mean by that? Did that mean that you actually worked more than you would record in your diary?
Yes.
And did the times recorded in your diary, were they submitted to anyone?
Well, submitted to the office, yes.
And does it follow from what you said that those times would be inaccurate because you're actually putting in more hours than you were recording on paper?
Yes.
Did the management or the office know that these records were deliberately inaccurate?
In that we were working more hours than we were claiming, yes.
Now, I think you explained to us in your witness statement that so far as your tasking was concerned, responsible with DCI Grey and DI HN 109. That's at the outset of your deployment. Is that right?
Yes.
And the group you were supposed to infiltrate was the Revolutionary Communist Party, or the RCP, yeah?
That's right.
What sort of organisation was the RCP?
A very hardline, ultra-left-wing organisation.
Why was the RCP of interest to the SDS?
In assistance to the security service, primarily, as they were a subversive organisation.
So the security service had assessed them as a subversive organisation, and SDS infiltration was as a result of the security service interest. Is that a fair summary?
I don't know when it was first covered.
In your time?
There was also a public order component.
Right, we'll look at that in due course. But the principal component was on counter-subversion grounds. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
All right. Now, it's right that some supporters, and I think you say in your statement, most members of the RCP use aliases. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you describe your main role as being to identify individuals by their real names. Is that right?
That's right.
Can you remember, or did you know why you were tasked to find out real names?
Primarily, my understanding was for vetting purposes.
All right, well, we'll look at that in a little more detail a little later. Do you know what was done with the information that you obtained, other than it was disseminated to other areas of special branch or the security service?
No.
You told us that you think that the purpose of obtaining real names was for vetting purposes. Do you know, or did you ever get the impression that it was used for blacklisting purposes?
I've not heard that suggested, no.
All right. And what was your understanding of subversion or a subversion group?
I forget the exact definition now, but roughly speaking, those who seek the overthrow of democracy by, I think the phrase, violent, industrial or other means.
Were you aware of something labelled the Harris definition or the Lord Harris definition?
No.
As well as giving consideration as to whether a group had subversive ideologies, did you ever apply your mind as to whether, in fact, a group had the means and ability to carry any subversive intent out?
I understand that was a change in the thinking in Government Security Service that ultimately led to withdrawal of coverage of the RCP.
During your time in the field?
Yes.
Was it something that you ever applied your mind to whilst you were deployed?
I wasn't there to define subversion.
All right. But did you ever think when you were feeding back on a particular group, well, they may think this, but there isn't really a realistic opportunity that they're going to achieve it? Was that something that ever crossed your mind?
No, I think the threat was a national security threat if those people had got into positions of influence or intelligence.
Now, you've spoken a little bit about public order concerns in relation to the RCP. I think you described them in your witness statement as very minor. Do you remember using that expression?
In terms of the threat to disorder, that was never their intention, to cause disorder.
I see. Can I just bring up a document, please? It's UCPI 30351, and that's at C85 of the hard copy bundle. Thank you. This is a report dated the 2nd of March 1992 attributed to you, and it's an intelligence report about RCP stewards. I just want to look at some bits of it. Paragraph 2 says, the following people are often employed as stewards on public order occasions and are included either as organisers or because they have shown themselves prepared to resort to violence when they consider necessary. When employed as stewards, all RCP members and supporters are under strict control of the chief steward and team leaders. In addition to these people, all senior members of the RCP will involve themselves in physical violence when politically necessary. And then under a privacy redaction, it says this of an individual: although of a very quiet demeanour, Privacy was recently acquitted of causing grievous bodily harm at Crown Court together with somebody else, arising from a fight whilst fly posting, a matter of which he is quite proud and he now claims to have been guilty. At the bottom of the document there's a privacy redaction. It says of that individual, a founder supporter of the party and at one time a member, although now returned to supporter status. Privacy is very much trusted for his reliability in a fight. Immediately over the page, please, right at the top, Privacy is usually employed in IFM, so that's Irish Freedom Movement activities, but will always be used in a stewarding role for any RCP or Workers Against Racism activity. He has in the past been involved in fights with class war activists. Next, but one, although not an imposing physical presence and of a quiet demeanour, Privacy was involved with Privacy in a fight with two class war activists who were the worse for the encounter. And then towards the bottom of the page, Privacy was involved in a fight with class war activists together with Privacy, see above. He's quite capable of violence and would not shrink from it in the future. So this report identifies RCB stewards who were, in your assessment, capable of violence. Is that right?
Yes.
But I think you've told us this wasn't a group that went looking for violence. Is that right?
Not as a group, no.
No. And a term you use more than once in that report is, and this is my expression, not your words, but people would resort to violence when necessary. What did you mean when by the term when necessary?
I don't recall this report offhand. I've not seen it before. I don't know what the exact meaning of that phrase is. I can only speak in general terms as to my appreciation of them.
By the time that your infiltration of the RCP had concluded, in your assessment, did the group have the ability or means to undermine or overthrow parliamentary democracy?
No.
I just want to look at something you said in your witness statement, which is for your assistance, pages 40 to 41, paragraph 125. You say the RCP was definitely a subversive organisation, but it was not really a challenge to public order. It was a thoroughly revolutionary organisation in that it advocated the violent overthrow of the state, but it was too small to threaten revolution in and of itself. It wanted to create the potential for revolution and then take over the leadership. But I never heard any practical plans at how they were going to achieve that. Do you remember saying that in your witness statement?
Yes.
And I think, given your slightly earlier comments, that's an assessment that you would stand by. Is that fair?
Yes, I think so.
Now, did your focus of your deployment eventually switch to a different group, being Class War?
Yes.
What sort of organisation was Class War?
Very loosely organised, an amalgam of groups all over the country.
What was the concern with this group?
Public order, primarily at the time.
Now, you tell us in your witness statement that when your deployment switched target, you thought you were going to have an air gap of something like 3 months, but you were pressed by DCI HN86 and in fact was given a month to transfer from the RCP to Class War. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Did you feel like you had sufficient time to transition from the one group to the other?
I'd made my plans for the transition on the basis of 3 months, but was confronted with the desire to do it within 1 month, so I made alternative plans. I would have been more comfortable with 3.
Did you feel you'd been given sufficient time to prepare for your next infiltration?
I probably didn't when I was first told, but as it turned out, I did.
Did you feel that the immediacy to change groups, did you feel that that was something that might have exposed you to any risk?
Yes, clearly, because I would have to have a cover story as to how that had come about.
Being careful, please, as to any operational sensitivities, but do you have any idea why you were pressed in this way?
I believe, looking back on it, was because of a campaign that occurred the year before that Class War had organised.
Do you remember the name of that campaign?
The Summer of Discontent.
I see.
And that the intelligence was that they were planning to build upon that and create even more disorder the next summer.
Was there any formal process in place to sort of address your concerns about this push to be ready to get into Class War quicker than you anticipated? Was there any formal process in place to raise this with your superiors?
No, there was no formal process. That was a matter of discussion between myself and the managers as to whether it was achievable and how it could be done.
Did you take it up with them?
Oh, yes.
And what was their reaction to you saying that you didn't think a month was sufficient time?
I don't think I put it in those terms.
Forgive me, how did you put it?
In that I would rather have 3 months to do lay all the groundwork fully,
And what was their reaction?
that they needed it done sooner than that. I reassessed and came back to them and agreed.
Now, something you also go on to say in your witness statement is that being deployed for too long risked burnout or over-association with the target group. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
What did you mean by over-association?
I'm not sure I can remember what my intention behind that comment was.
It might help you then if I take you to the relevant part. It's page 19, paragraph 61. Says it was also made clear to me in the conversations with my managers that the role would last approximately 4 years. I do not know whether there was any particular scientific or operational basis for this figure, although it stands to reason that it will take a UCO some time to achieve a position where they can access reliable information, and being deployed for too long risks burnout or over-association with the target group. Does that help you in your recollection as to what you meant by over-association?
Yes, I think by the time that I made this statement, I'd become aware of some issues, such as was mentioned earlier, of somebody identifying with the target and, in fact, joining them.
Whilst you were in the SDS, did you become aware of any undercover officer who had over-associated in any way with members of their group?
No.
Any rumours or anything like that about members being, officers being, getting in too deep with their group or members of their group?
No, I was aware there was some sort of scandal involving the officer you mentioned earlier, but I didn't know what the scandal was and didn't know that it was of the nature that it turned out.
I see. Is that Mike Chitty?
Yes.
All right. And what about afterwards, Mike Chitty aside? Were you made aware of anyone who was, again, said to have got overly familiar or overly associated with their group?
No, I don't think so.
All right. So is that a convenient moment?
Certainly. We'll adjourn until 2 o'clock, please.